is, and then we're going to switch over and we're going to focus on Xamarin Android in particular, like all the moving parts, the SDKs that you have to download, the Android APIs, and all the other tools that work in sync with Xamarin Android in order to get your app running. Then we're going to build a quick app. It's a simple app. It's basic, but the purpose of it is to show you some of the basic layouts that you have access to, some of the basic controls. We're going to deploy that to the Xamarin Android emulator. We're going to build it in Xamarin Studio. One of the things I kind of want to show there is, when you're building out your activities or your layouts, we can do it in XML, and Xamarin Studio actually has a toolbox. How do you say it? Drag and drop development. Yeah, there you go, drag and drop development, which is pretty slick. So my name is Homero Lara. You can call me Homer. All my friends know me by Homer. I'm currently working as a consultant for a company called Tech Systems. I'm also a co-founder to DFWmobile.net, this user group. Welcome. We've been going strong now for a little over 2 years. So I don't think we've ever missed. We might have missed one meetup, maybe not. But that's my Twitter handle down at the bottom, my email address. If you want to get a hold of me, you can, communicate with me that way. I'll do my best to try to help out as much as possible. And this is DFWmobile.net. Welcome. Thank you guys for coming out today. We definitely appreciate it. That's our Twitter handle, and that's our website. If you guys want to just go out there and check it out. This is the leadership group. We all work pretty hard to keep this going. Only 2 of us are here today. 2 of us couldn't be here. So, also, Matrix sponsors our user group. They sponsor the room. They provide the drinks and they provide the food. They're definitely they are a staffing resource company. So if you guys are ever looking for any kind of job or tech job or some kind, definitely reach out to them. Couple of announcements. For those of you who are interested in learning more about Xamarin, they're having their 3rd annual conference in Florida. That's the website. The conference is called Evolve 16. If you guys have ever been to any tech conferences, I've been to quite a few. This is probably the best one, at least the best ones I've been to. They're really well organized. Locally, there is another .NET conference coming up in Deep Ellum. If you guys are familiar with Deep Ellum or Dallas, it's out there. It's a lot cheaper locally. I think they're going to have some Xamarin employees or people who work for Xamarin presenting there as well. Do you know if James is going to be at that one? Just checking that. Okay. So definitely recommend checking this out. A couple of other announcements. Someone from the user group reached out to me. They're looking to hire a Xamarin Android developer to convert their iOS application over to Xamarin Android. If you guys are interested, or if you know somebody who's interested, I can give you their contact information after the meetup, and you guys can follow up with them. He will be there, as well as Adam Hill. Okay. So at the .NET Unboxed, what's that? In Jimmy Bogard? Oh, Jimmy Bogard? Okay. I can't repeat it. I said you should repeat it. Yeah. So at this conference here, some of the well-known evangelists from Xamarin are going to be there. Definitely recommend you guys going out there and check them out. They are a plethora of information. They blog. I frequently go to their blogs just to learn more information. I go to their GitHubs and use some of their code whenever I'm trying to figure things out. So I definitely would recommend coming out to the .NET Unboxed. So just a show of hands, who in here has done Xamarin mobile development? Okay. So this slide here is like, what is Xamarin, right? Xamarin is the simple answer is it's a cross-platform development tool. Really what it does, it allows developers to create applications, Android and iOS applications in C# or .NET, without really having to use any of the, how do you know, without having to know Objective-C, without having to know Java. That's the quick answer, or the short answer. But Xamarin isn't the only player in town that does cross-platform development. Here's just a few. This is not by no means the entire list. Some of these I'm familiar with. Some of them I've actually used them before. We have Coney, which I've never really used, and I think they actually do native and hybrid solutions. Telerik platform is also one. Some of the ones you might recognize there is AppCelerator and PhoneGap. Have you guys used any of that before? Any of these? Tried it? Okay. The really interesting one on this slide, aside from Xamarin, is RIM objects. RIM objects actually deploys natively to Android and iOS, and you get a choice of 3 different languages. It's C#, Oxygen, and the other one is Silver, I believe. Oh, sorry. Let me go back a little bit. Yeah, Oxygen and Silver. What's really interesting about this one is for about $400 or $500, you can deploy to all 3 devices without really having to have a separate download or a separate install for iOS and another one for Android. If you guys are interested, check that out. I can give it away. I'll put it out.
Does it have performance benchmarks?
To be honest, I don't know a whole lot of it. I have tinkered with it. I have it. It comes with a Visual Studio plugin. I don't know enough to be able to tell you some of the pros and cons. I just thought it was pretty slick that there's another native cross-platform developer out there. So just to kind of give you more details about what Xamarin is, basically it allows developers to use .NET, C#, and actually you can use F# as well to write and to share your code across Android and iOS. Are you guys familiar with Mono, the Mono framework? So that's what Xamarin is based on, the Mono framework. And the Mono framework is based on .NET's BCL, base class library. So when you're using Xamarin Android, you actually have access to all the system, I wouldn't say all of them, but a big portion of the system libraries and functionality in .NET. And with Xamarin Android, you get a 100% API coverage. This isn't all of them, but as you can see, we have some of the framework options here: NFC, System XML, Link, IO.
Do you happen to know what C# version Mono is caught up with?
Maybe 5, or at least 4.5, because you can use Link, generics, async and await, if you guys are familiar with that as well. Same thing, 100% API coverage on iOS. You also have 2 options. If you're used to using Visual Studio, there's a plugin for it. It actually comes with Visual Studio 2015 already. Or you can use Xamarin Studio, which isn't a bad option either. It's actually very improved. I use it a lot too. It's any app that you write in Xamarin installs natively. It's a native app. You get native performance on it. And this slide is actually a little bit outdated. It shows you here that it's running in a just-in-time compilation. Well, as of Lollipop, it doesn't use a just-in-time compilation. Everything is AOT, if you're familiar with that term, ahead-of-time compilation. And actually, it runs in the Android runtime in Lollipop and later versions, whereas before that, it ran in the Dalvik runtime. We'll go over that in a little bit. Let's go to development experience. Any questions so far? Here's some of the support that you get, or some of the features that you get using Xamarin Android or just Xamarin in general, link support, XML. And for those of you who are .NET developers, you don't really have to start following the development practices or do the development practices in Objective-C or Android. Like in Android, if I want to add an event handler or what's equivalent in .NET to an event handler, like the add and remove listeners, I could actually add delegates. And I could do the plus minus for an event. This is just another slide that shows you some of the differences. Back. Over on the left-hand side, you'll see how the equivalent is done in Java versus C#. Definitely lesser code, easier to maintain. Can you guys see this pretty good? Should I? You see the colors and the lines? Hold on.
You will see code when we get to the.
Yeah. Let me
I think we can just.
here it is. Does that look better?
The next one.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so here, if you're using Xamarin Android, and if you're coming from an Android development Java, you can still use those same practices in Xamarin Android. Or you also have the option of using the .NET way of doing things. You have the text change event handler, whereas in Java you would have to add or remove that listener event. So this is the other part to the conversation that we were talking about earlier. All the SDKs, all the Android libraries, and the additional tools that you need to have installed on your machine before you start using Xamarin Android. And I'll go over these in general. Luckily, the Xamarin installer handles about 95% of this for you. The first thing that you need, obviously, is the Java SDK. And really, the only thing that we're going to be using from the Java SDK are the compilers and the debug tools. After that, you need to have installed Android Java, which is a subset of the Java SDK. That gives you access to things like string buffer, if you still want to use string buffer, if you're familiar with that. Or in .NET, you can use string builder. You still have access to all the system.NET libraries as well in .NET for this. You also need the Android libraries, and I'll go over that as well. There is an SDK manager that you can bring up from either Visual Studio or from Xamarin Studio. The Android libraries are what give you access to the different API levels. Like if you're trying to develop an app for KitKat or Lollipop or some of the other versions of Android, you have to download these libraries in order to start working with those. You also have access to something called Android NDK, the native development kit. That one I've never used before, but that comes in handy if you want to write a portion of your app in like C or C++. It actually takes advantage of Java's what's called JNI, Java Native Interface, and we can kind of cover that as well. Also installed is the mono.NET. We were talking about that earlier. Basically, it comes with the BCL.NET base class library. The most important parts from that we get are the C# compiler and the mono runtime. If you guys are you guys familiar? Do you guys do any Android development? So in Android, your application runs in either the Dalvik runtime, or if you're using Lollipop or later, it runs in the Android runtime. Well, when you're using Xamarin Android, your application runs in two spaces, in two runtimes. The mono runtime, which gives you access to all the .NET features, and the Dalvik runtime, which gives you access to all the Android APIs and all the Android libraries. I was telling you before, all these SDKs, all these APIs, and some additional tools are handled for you when you download the Xamarin installer. I don't think I put a link. Yeah, there's a link up there. So this is basically an image of how your app runs in the your Xamarin Android app runs on a Android device using Xamarin Android. So basically, you know, everything runs on the Linux kernel, right? And then you have, in this case, we have the Android runtime. So it must be running on a device that has Lollipop or later. And we have the Mono, which is where all your .NET stuff runs, all your BCL. Now there you have access to .NET APIs. You have access to, from there, you get access to all the Android libraries and the Java SDK. Do you guys, I guess the best way I can tell you, so are you familiar with JNI? So the way that communication is handled is Xamarin calls them mono callable wrappers and Android callable wrappers. And that's how the communication goes back and forth. I brought up earlier Android's JNI or Java's JNI, Java Native Interface. And basically what that does is it's a platform or it's a framework that allows any Android application running in either the Java virtual machine, the Dalvik virtual machine, or Android runtime to be called from and called to any third-party libraries that aren't written in Java. In our case, C#. But if you chose to do it in C or C++, you would use JNI to be able to handle that communication. Now, how that stuff is all put together, I'm not too familiar with it, but as long as you know about it, that's a starter. Does anybody have any quick questions? Any thoughts or anything? So like I was telling you before, we're going to do a quick demo. We're actually going to build a Xamarin Android app. We're going to create an activity. We're going to use linear layout. We're going to add some views to it, and we're going to deploy it to Xamarin Android. So for those of you who are not familiar, Xamarin Android or Android has how do you call it, layouts or activities. And activities basically is the same thing. If you're coming from the .NET world, it's like a web form or a Windows form. It's the same thing. Every single app needs to have a launching application or a launching activity, which is the same thing in .NET as the main entry point in a Windows form application.
So when we work on this today, which API level should we have on our machines?
So I think the one we're going to do today, it's a range. I think it's from 16 to 21. I'll go through the whole setup. I'll actually start up a whole new app. And I'm going to go through all the defaults. I think real quick, let me show you what it looks like, because I think I have it running. This is a Xamarin Android Player. It's a tip calculator, really simple. Basically, you enter your bill amount. Say we went somewhere to go eat fancy, $200 tip amount. I mean, bill amount. Say I want to give, I don't know, 25%. Calculate it. It's not fancy or anything. There's definitely, it can be cleaned up a lot. But the purpose of it is to kind of show you some of these controls and how you can lay this out using Xamarin Android. Xamarin Studio, sorry. It is. Maybe like an anniversary. So yeah, I briefly talked about what an activity is. So Xamarin applications or Android applications in general is just really, in the simplest way to put it, is a collection of activities. And each activity has a layout, A layout is basically how you put together a bunch of UI components. In our case, they're just views. So a view is like a text box, edit text box, a button. Definitely, you can get a lot more elaborate than that. I'll go over some of the other views in a second. What? These are just 3 of the views that I listed out. It's not by any means all the views that you're limited to, but we have a linear layout. And with the linear layout, you have 2 options, vertical or horizontal. So if you choose vertical, essentially all your controls are going to be stacked on top of each other. If you choose horizontal, then they're just going to be placed right next to each other. We also have a grid layout, if you guys are familiar with that, like a table layout. You have a relative layout, which is probably one of the ones that I use the most. That's actually your most powerful one. It actually assigns your controls relative to the next one, and you can actually specify position in it. You have a few other ones. Depending on what API level you're targeting, they can come with different types of layouts more powerful than this. You can read up on those type of layouts from like Google, developer documentation. Even Android, Xamarin has a lot of documentation on this. So let's bring up the Xamarin Studio. This is what Xamarin Studio looks out whenever you first start it out. You have options to download any sample apps that you want, install them on your machine, run them, debug them, make modifications to them. In our case, we're just going to go ahead and create a new solution. You get a template whenever you create a new project. Now here you have, if you want to start out like cross-platform, like you were talking about earlier, James, you can definitely click on the cross-platform category. So Xamarin has another type of application called Xamarin Forms. Let me backtrack a little bit. Xamarin by itself already allows you to share like a lot of your business logic, a lot of your data access layer, to be able to share that across iOS and Android applications. They took it a step further because one of the other things that was missing is the ability to share your UI. Be able to write one text box control and be able to have that one text box control deploy to an iOS application or to an Android application without having to make any modifications to it. You just create it once and it shares across both. We can talk about Xamarin Forms. I think we can go over that later today or in a different session, but it's definitely very powerful. You have the option to create an iOS application. In our case, we're just going to target Android. Over here to the right, you can choose your language, C#, or for those of you who are familiar with F#, you can do that as well. I haven't done that, but I'm going to stick with C#. Just going to call this DFW TC. Here we have what you were talking about earlier, Will, the platforms that we're gonna target. It comes out by default selected as modern platform, and so that's targeting API 16 through 19. Are you guys familiar with these API levels? So, all right, so API levels correspond to like Lollipop. Lollipop is API level 21. I think the latest operating system for Android came out last week, and I think it's Marshmallow, and I think that's 24. 24? Yeah, one of those two, right?
A lot of us started using it was back in Froyo,
Right.
For your gingerbread.
You definitely have access to that. We can actually target this for like the very first version of Android if we wanted to. Maximum capability. This gives you the broadest range coverage, API 10 through 19. that's kind of really hard to do just because of all the different devices, all the different form factors. And not only that, a lot of these devices like Samsung have their own flavor of that particular API. It's not just straight vanilla Android. Like if you get your phone from Google, that's vanilla Android. It doesn't come pre-installed. It doesn't have any tweaks, doesn't have any other additional features. Whereas if you get your phone from, like, let's say Samsung or some other carrier or some other company, most of the times they tweak their operating system. So whenever Android or Google releases an update, like let's say Marshmallow or an update to Lollipop, those devices usually get that update a lot later than, say, somebody who goes straight through Google. And this is the latest and greatest. It says here API 21, but I'm pretty sure that's going to be updated here pretty soon to reflect Marshmallow. We're going to stick with modern development. Theming. Are you, how many web developers do we have here? So you guys are really familiar with this concept. It's basically applying a theme to the entire application. You know, you have one file that controls, you know, your background or the color of your application, the toolbar, all that stuff is modified in just one location. I'm just going to stick with the default. Google Play services. I guess if you guys are going to be using stuff like Google Pay, any of the other options that you have available through Google Play services, we can actually have those packages installed into our Xamarin Android application. Just going to go ahead and click next. I'm going to leave that as is. I'm not going to tie this in to any kind of Git repository. Create it. Usually what I do is whenever I create an application, whether I'm using Xamarin Studio or Visual Studio, the very first time I build it, just to make sure it's working right. Or at least I start out with a solid build. So we're just going to go ahead and build it. Have any of you guys ever seen Xamarin Studio? The IDE?
It look like this.
It's a lot. It made a lot of improvements. So right off the bat, I just kind of want to go over some of the stuff that you see right now, because whenever you create this application or the Xamarin Android application, it basically is templated. Let me see here. Let me go over this here first. So in an Android application, you have a directory called resources. So resources are just, they're, how do you put it? They're basically assets or resources that don't have any code behind them. In this case, you see like drawable HDPI, drawable MDPI, you know, XXX, XX. All this really corresponds to your images, because whenever you're developing a mobile application, especially on Android, you have all these devices that have different screen resolutions, and this is where you would deploy images that would fit those different screen resolutions. So, you know, for high res, something with a high res resolution, you would put an image here. You would dump it in this folder. Medium as well, and it could be the same image over and over, but you need to have those images at runtime. Well, whenever your application is executing, the operating system itself is going to decide which is the proper image to display. You don't have to write any code for that. This is our layout file. This is what I was telling you earlier. This is what contains all your markup to add controls or to display controls on the actual device, on the activity. Let's take a look at that right quick. This is what our default application looks like. This is part of the boiler template code that we get. It's just a button that says hello world every time you click it. I think it increments by 1 each time. As a matter of fact, we can probably deploy this. If you look up here at the top, we have, we can choose our target. In this case, I already have one device running in the Xamarin Android Player. This is it right here. But these are some of the other emulators that I've downloaded. Nexus 10, 5, Nexus S. And if I were to attach my phone via USB to my Mac, it would actually pop up in here as well, and I could choose to deploy it to there as well. But we're going to stick with the running version that I have right now.
Is that the IP address?
Yeah.
Is that something special you did?
No, I don't. I updated. I don't know if it's a bug or what, but everything started coming out that way now.
Maybe it's a feature.
Could be.
Your emulator that you're running, you know, the one that's coming up for me is like the one I had back when I was playing around with Android Studio. How do I choose from this interface a different emulator?
Yeah. So let me stop this. From this interface, it's already going to know which emulators you've already downloaded. So here, if I've downloaded these emulators, I've got Nexus 10, Nexus 5. I got 2 different versions of Lollipop, or 3 different versions of Lollipop, and I have Nexus S. But if you have the Xamarin Android installer, you can actually choose more emulators. So in this case, this is what gives me access to download more emulators. It's the part of the Xamarin Android Player. If I wanted to choose Nexus 4, I could. Nexus 7, Jelly Bean, KitKat. This is where I was telling you guys earlier that I use Genymotion a lot because the available options of emulators in Genymotion is way more than what's available in Xamarin Android Player. But the cool thing about Xamarin Android Player is that it is pretty fast. It's a lot faster than what comes with Google. I'm pretty sure you're familiar with that experience.
You might try Command Plus.
Command Plus. Let's see something here. In this directory, values, let's talk about that right quick. If I wanted to have like some kind of string caption or some kind of value that was globally accessible to me, I could access from any activity or any screen essentially, I would dump it into this file. And essentially what happens is Android by itself will create a universal constant for this particular file. I could access that universal constant by whatever like values. I would say values dot, I don't know, hello world. And I would have access to whatever I designate hello world is in here. I could change this to DFW mobile, and it would be reflective across the entire application. Let's tinker with the actual, let's look at the activity. So like I was telling you before, each Android application needs to have an activity that is designated as the launcher. The way you do that is you decorate your activity object with this attribute right here. In that attribute, you actually see a property called main launcher. You set that to true. And so whenever that application is run, that is going to be the first screen that the user sees. Some of this other stuff, label, I could actually change this as well. I can say, I don't know, and so whenever I run my app, that's what it's going to be called, hello world. I could actually add an icon to this activity or to my Android app. And so whenever somebody installs it, whatever icon I designate in here is what's going to be seen on the user screen. So whenever they're looking for your application, that's the image that they're going to see. Let's go over this right quick. So anytime you create anything in the resources directory, by default, what's going to happen is Android is going to create a universal constant. So let's go back over here to this layout. So by default, there was this button, and its name is called My Button. If we go over to this file. It's called a resource file, and I'll explain this a little bit more later on. Here's a layout. Where is that? There's my button. You can have access to this button throughout the entire application just by calling resource.id and saying my button. Resource.id.my button. I'll explain this a little bit better down the road. Let's get rid of some of this boilerplate code. So whether you're using Xamarin Android or just Android by itself, each activity has a life cycle. In order for your app to run, in order for it to display anything, by default, you need to override the onCreate method. There's a couple of other methods in there that a lot of people use, like whenever your application gets paused or another application comes above your application, like covers up your application, there's other life cycles that this activity is hit. But in this case, we're only going to cover the onCreate. Each onCreate has a bundle object as a parameter. Now, where the bundle object comes into play is every now and then your Android application is destroyed. And it's destroyed, the simplest, I guess the best way I can explain it is if you have your Android device or you're running the app in the Android device and you tilt it, or you turn it sideways. Essentially what's happening is Android is going to adjust your activity for the new layout change. By doing that, it's going to destroy that activity. Sometimes you still want to keep some of the state of that activity, and that's where bundle comes into play. You could actually store some objects or some values in bundle, and whenever your activity goes back through the onCreate method, you can still have access to those values. Let's go here. I'm going to delete this, just completely wipe it out. Anybody have any other questions? Any questions at all? Okay. So here, if you can see, this is our layout, and my designation is vertical. So any control that I add to it is going to be stacked on top of each other. So we're going to start out with a, how do I put it? What do I want to put? Text view. This is the equivalent to a label in .NET. I'm going to give it an ID. As you can see, some of the IntelliSense that comes with Android Studio. Xamarin Studio, I'm sorry. Do you know if Android Studio has IntelliSense in it? Okay. We're going to give it a width. Here, I just want to say I want it to match parent. So let me select this first. The majority, not every single view or every control, but the majority of your controls in Xamarin Android, and I believe in Android by itself, you need to provide at least a base width and a base height. Otherwise, you're just going to get a runtime error. So here what I'm saying is I want my width to match the width of the container object that this control is in. In this case, the container object is this entire layout. So however wide this layout is how wide my text view is going to be. Let me go ahead and specify the height. In this case, I just want to wrap the content. I don't want it any taller than it should be. Just want to say whatever I put in as its text box is how tall it's going to be. This is going to be our bill amount. Below that, what I want to do is I want to add an edit text, which is equivalent to a text box in .NET. I'm just going to switch this over to, let me change this ID. I'm going to call this,
Edit bill amount.
yeah, edit bill amount. Let me compile. Could actually view, get the designer. I could actually view how my layout's coming out. I want to show you the toolbox. So in this case, these are all the controls that I have access to right now. Well, these are the base controls. So you have different categories: form widgets, text views, layouts. Let's go ahead and drag another text view. Yeah. This can be kind of tricky sometimes. Yeah, I didn't get it. There we go. I can actually edit its properties through the designer. In this case, I want to call this, you know what, scratch that. I don't want this to be an edit text box. Let's go through here. Let's change this to a text view. I don't know what happened to it here. Let's see. Let me provide some text to it. There we go. So let me take you back to this control, the edit text. I actually want to say that I only want numeric values in this text box. I can actually alter that behavior through the designer. So I just want to say that it's numeric. So in this case, since it could be, I'm going to say it's decimal. As you can see, some of the other options that we have available: phone number, password. And that behavior will do is whenever a user clicks on that text box, you'll see like either the phone pad dialer or like a calculator keypad. This is by default without you having to write any additional logic for it. So there's drag and drop. Let me close this out. edit text again. Let me close this. There we go. Yeah, this plain text. Properties. This is going to be the text box for our actual tip amount. So we're going to call this X. We set its behavior as well. I want this to be numeric. I'm just going to say that that one's integer. Yeah, that's the percent. Well, this is just kind of for demo purposes, so I'm just going to type in like 15 for 15% or 20 for 20%. Okay, let's build right quick. Make sure we don't have any errors. It's build successful. Now let's go back to the view. I want to add a new layout. I keep on closing this out. Shoot. Here, as you can see, some of the additional layouts that we have: a frame layout, a grid layout, like we were talking about before. In this case, I want another linear layout, but this one I want it to be designated as horizontal. So I'm just going to drag that out onto my layout. And there it goes, it's added it to it. In there, I want to put another text view. I don't see. Let me drag this onto this. I don't want that as a text view. So I just want to call this let's look at this right quick. We drag another box for the actual amount. Let me delete that. Yeah, let's leave it at medium. Now I'm actually just going to put some text in there as some placeholder. It makes it easier for me to see it visually whenever I'm using the designer. Oh, I do. There it goes. Sorry. Let's rebuild this. Actually, let's deploy it. Here's where I was telling you about the behaviors that you can manipulate. Whenever I click on the bill amount, say, I don't know, $25. What actually, I can take that text out. Same thing for tip amount. I don't have access to the dot because I didn't designate it as decimal. I actually stated full integer. In the bill amount, I could actually put 25 point, I don't know, 75 if I want to. Go ahead and shut this down.
So was the tip amount like a percentage?
The tip amount is just a full integer.
Oh,
So like, I guess whenever you go out, you decide to do like 15%. I don't know if you decide to do like 15.5. The bill amount is decimal. And all that's modified through the properties of the actual control.
oh, it just meant that was like when you put that 12, that was the add on the 12% tip, or was it that?
Right.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. So let's go back to the actual layout again. So now that we have this, let me drop in here another layout. And I want this one to be vertical. And in here, I just want a button. Let me close form widgets. Here we go. This is actually going to be the control that does all the calculations. I'm going to name that one. This is what our XML layout looks from designing it with the tool. So let's go back to our activity. In the onCreate method of your activity, this is where you actually specify the activity that you want, or the layout that you want, or the UI basically that you want to provide for this this activity. In this case, this is how you do it. You call this method called setContentView. When you set content view, I'm going to call out to that resource, that universal constant that represents my layout. So in this case, my layout's main. If I had another layout, I could just say dot, and I would have access to, I don't know, if I had like a second screen or main layout 2, I could do that as well. So now we're ready to do some code behind. If I want to have access to some of the values that I dumped into into those text boxes, and actually have access to the button. Say actually edit. So earlier before, I keep on going back to the resources, to the resource directory. This is what gives us access to that particular control. So in this case, I just want to have the base bill amount. So now,
Could you go to view and zoom in so that we can see your code
Sure.
a little bit better?
sorry.
Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes.
Good. So now I also want to have access to my tip control. And in this case, I'm declaring it as a type of edit text. I don't want anything else. So So now if I want to get the amount or the input value to each one of these controls, we just say var, let's see, tip dot text. In this case, we want it to be a type of decimal. We want access to the base amount bill. Just copy this. Say bar. So let's see if this compiles. Okay, that's fine. All this is telling me is that I'm not using this variable anywhere, which is good for code cleanup. So now I actually want to get access to my button, and I want to assign an event handler to that button to do the calculation. In this case, I want a type of button. Here it is. This is where some of the differences between developing in .NET or using Android. In Android, if you wanted to add in Java, you would basically use the listener pattern, the add and remove listener pattern. So I think that would be, let's see. Don't know right off the top of my head which one that is, but I know in .NET, all I have to do to add an event handler for it is this. So every time that button is clicked, the code that I type inside here is going to get executed. So in this case, well, actually, let me move this code in here. So in this case, we're doing all the calculations for the values that we typed into those text boxes, and I want to dump it off into my my grand total text box.
How resource intensive is looking at the.
It can be, depending on how complex your activity is, it can be resource intensive, because here's the thing, your views, your layouts and your views are based on hierarchies. So in this case, what's going to happen is whenever you do find view by ID, it's going to essentially traverse that entire layout that we designated. So if we go back to our main layout, what's happening behind the scenes whenever I call that particular object, or when I'm looking for like a particular text view, it's going to start out from the bottom and it's going to start looking for that particular whatever name. Like let's say, for example, if I'm looking for text view grand total, behind the scenes, the operating system is going to traverse that layout looking for text view grand total, and it's going to stop at the very first instance that it finds it and return you that reference to that object. Now this can be really resource intensive if you have like nested layouts, which is really not a recommended practice. So here I just want to set the grand total text value to whatever my calculation is. In this case, I just want to say it's a rebuild.
You want to do text? No, never mind.
Yeah, I'm setting.
You want to assign a total to the string format.
Is it not?
String format grand total text.
Yeah, so essentially I'm going to replace this parameter right here with my grand total. Oh, I'm sorry. No, you're right. I see what you're saying. Total. There we go. Let's run this right quick. So let's say my base bill amount's $125.97. If I want to tip, I don't know, 25%, there's the outcome right there. It's $157. I know this is kind of simple, but I just kind of wanted to show you guys the UI designer. I wanted to show you how you access your controls. It's very similar to using just straight Android in Java without using Xamarin Android. So in this case, we are debugging. Behind the scenes, what's happening, what Xamarin Android does whenever you're debugging an application, it installs your app in two parts. There is the shared runtime, and then there is the shared platform. Xamarin specifically does it this way so that the following times that you install this app, the installation doesn't take as long. So the first time is usually the longest, and what gets copied over is like the mono runtime, the BCL, all your system.NET, basically IO gets installed on your device, and it shouldn't have to get installed anytime after that. The other part is the shared platform, and that's all the Android API specific stuff, like text, like the text view, edit text, buttons, all that stuff. What happens is the compiler behind the scenes will figure out what the differences are between that shared platform and just make updates to that. So instead of installing everything at every single time that you deploy, it's only differences. So that helps out with the performance of installing. Obviously, you can shorten that up by changing this from debug to release mode. Wanted to show you also as well is the SDK manager. This is it right here. So Google broke up the some of the tools, the libraries, and additional components that you need to create Android apps into three parts. Here you have all your tools. Like in this case, the Android SDK tools. This is what gives you access to like string buffer or some of the other Android specific objects. Here we have the APIs, Android 6.0, which is Marshmallow. Android, it's API 23, 22. And then they give you something else called extras. This one here is important because in order to debug your app, you actually need to install the Google USB driver. So if I wanted to deploy to my phone and debug, I would connect my USB via USB. I would connect my phone to my device, and that would allow me to debug in real time from my device to the code or Visual Xamarin Studio or Visual Studio. There's actually an option to debug over Wi-Fi. That was kind of a crummy experience. I got it to work a couple of times, but then I kept losing my connection. So I wouldn't recommend doing it. I mean, there's not that much of a big difference between actually having your phone tethered versus over Wi-Fi. Let's see. Yeah.
I noticed with this SDK manager that like just because you maybe selected 21 or 22 or whatever doesn't mean that you've also now got all the previous ones. Is that
No,
correct?
that's not.
Install them all individually.
Yes, you have to, and that can take a really long time. So let me go back to that window again.
And it takes up a lot of room too.
It does.
And this is the Google
Yes.
SDK manager, not Xamarin.
Let me take you back to the presentation.
So like if you're saying that you're gonna, this is the minimum and this is the maximum, you've got to have all those APIs
Installed. Yeah, for sure. If you try to access, or you'll get a compile time issue, build error. If you're trying to access something that isn't there, you won't even have access to it. So if we go back to, I think it's, let me see, what screen is it? This one right here. Let me run it. Pretty much, Xamarin does a really good job of following the native build process. So part of what is your native build process is anywhere from your Java SDK all the way up to the Android NDK. So that build process stays the same. The thing that's unique to Xamarin is .NET and Mono. That's how Xamarin enables you to use C# that communicates down to the Android application. Let me see, what else do I want to show you guys? I really haven't used this one before. I guess this is just Google. I use the Xamarin Android Player to manage all my emulators. I don't use any of this right here. Yeah. So let's do this. You actually have, I'm not really good at this one right here, being able to use command line prompt to access what I have in my SDKs, my Android SDKs. But if you guys are interested in doing that, you can. Actually, from the from Xamarin Studio. Close this out.
Is that like the package manager?
Yeah, for sure. So like I guess you could say it's kind of like similar to Git. You know, if I want to download something, I can type in a command.
I found that really useful for downgrading. Like if you have an upgrade and something breaks, go in there to the package manager console and install packages.
Uninstall Mac, right. It's kind of like the NuGet package manager. Same concept.
You also have to use the command prompt if you want to do like connect to an Android in OS X at the Android player. If you're running Visual Studio, use the command prompt and provide the address. And you can add that as an available Android device to
Right.
log on.
So just some quick tips on this. Android does come, Xamarin Android does come with some overhead. Let me go back to this screen. So what Xamarin does, or what Xamarin Android does, in order to access things like a text view, an edit text, a button in Android, Android creates what's called a managed callable wrapper. That's taking advantage of Java's JNI. And so basically what that's doing is that's calling out to those the Android runtime or the Dalvik runtime to say, hey, I want access to this particular object, or I want access to this particular object's text value, and vice versa. Whenever Android or your app needs to call back out to the mono runtime, it uses what's called Android callable wrappers. Both of those communications are handled with JNI, Java Native Interface. I don't know the actual specifics of how JNI works in those runtimes, but know that they're there. And whenever you create a Xamarin application, so by default, it's going to be bigger. It's going to be in size. It's going to be bigger than if you wrote it in just straight Java. But Xamarin actually provides you with a way to reduce your size of your application. See if I can find it. So they provide an option called linker. So right now, since I'm debugging, just testing, I'm not linking anything. But what the linker does is it goes through the mono runtime, and at compile time, it removes or strips out any of the features from IL or from .NET that you're not using. As a matter of fact, you can set this to be really aggressive. You have an option to say, okay, only SDKs assemblies, which correspond to mono or Xamarin Android, or all linked assemblies. What that's going to do is if you're using any third-party tools, it's going to go through and strip out any features of those third-party libraries that you're not using. This one I've used it before, and it's caused a lot of problems. I got some unexpected results. It actually removed code that I was using, or pieces of code that I was using.
Is these options only available for iOS?
It's available for Android and iOS. Right.
On my Xamarin Studio, I don't see the link
In-
at the end.
In Xamarin Studio? This is a Xamarin Studio right here.
Yeah, you're having iOS Apple device.
The pack.
I'm having a Windows device. I don't see.
Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. Sean, in iOS, are the linking options the same? Xamarin iOS?
Yeah.
Okay. And actually, nowadays, there are some third-party libraries out there that you can use terminal services or command prompt, and you can specify some particular commands to automatically strip out things that you're not using. Because some of these third-party libraries can be pretty huge. Like, let's say, for example, just recently on an app that I was using, I'm using a PDF third-party library, which provides a lot of functionality. We were only using, I would say, about 10% of that PDF library. But whenever we installed it, it jumped our application from, I want to say, 35 megs to about 80 some odd megs. And it came down to that PDF third-party library. So we contacted the vendor. They actually gave us the commands to run that strip out the stuff that we're not using. We can use linker to do that as well.
Release is also a lot smaller.
For sure.
The debug build.
For sure. So one of the first options to reduce the size of your application is choose release before you go to production.
Do that anyway.
Yeah. Anybody have any other questions or?
Can you say how you did remove the things which you're not using from the third-party library? They give the command.
Yeah, they gave us the commands. I don't know them off the top of my head, but I know that you can either Google them or I guess they would have to tell you the exact portions of that library that you want to remove. So I'm assuming the command is still the same, the base command, but the actual, whatever you want to target is different. Let me see what else. Some performance tips, especially in Android, using weak references versus just using straight objects. Like let's say, for example, an image view in Android, images, period, can consume a lot of memory. It's always great or best practices to use weak references, because what happens is whenever your activity goes out of scope, the garbage collector may not know, even though you're not using that activity, but because you're using some kind of, I don't know, like an event handler or a delegate that's referencing it, the garbage collector will not clean that up, will not clean up this activity that you're not using anymore. So it's always good to remove your event handlers and to use weak references for like any objects that you may not, you won't be using, that just in scope of that activity. Let's see what else. It's pretty much kind of like an introduction. I don't know if you guys have any questions, any technical real.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind some assistance in finding a better emulator.
For sure.
Than what's showing up. I'm using Windows 10 here, but I mean my emulator screen was like this large, and the icons for like the home button, the call button, are like to half the screen. I don't know if it's because I have a touch screen thing. I don't know what's going on. But if you get around to it, that'd be nice.
Yeah, I mean, Genymotion is probably who? Page? Oh, sorry. Hold on. I think it's www.Geny. This is it. You actually have a free version and then a paid version, and if it's just for personal use, I believe it's like $99 or $100. It's definitely worth it.
It's free until we use for commercial.
Is that what it is? Okay, so there you go.
And you might want to show them the Android one.
The
And the Xamarin one. So the Xamarin Android Player is free if you have a Xamarin license.
so this is the actual installed version of Xamarin Android Player. This is what I have access to. I don't know if they provided any more updates to it. Here I actually have an option to update the current emulators that I have.
And Genymotion and Xamarin Android Player both run off of VirtualBox.
Right.
And you can like run 3D accelerated apps inside of.
Yeah, Xamarin Android Player.
In fact, Miguel, the last Evolve was showing some 3D racing game that he was playing in Xamarin Android Player.
Just to kind of go over some of the options that you have available that come with Xamarin. Obviously, you get the platform. They have something called Test Cloud, which I don't know how many devices they have in Test Cloud, but I mean, it can be really expensive to develop an application. And I mean, if you're going to be testing on multiple devices, obviously buying multiple devices is really kind of out of the question. So Xamarin has an offering called Xamarin Test Cloud, and you will deploy your device to this cloud, and it will run your app, and it'll return you results. It'll actually take screenshots of any exceptions that happen, or you can tell it to take a screenshot to see how it looks in a particular device. It's an expensive option, but it definitely saves you a lot of money in having to buy devices or paying for testers. It definitely pays for itself. You have Xamarin Insights, and this is more for like gathering metrics and monitoring your actual apps that are out there. Like if an exception happens, Xamarin Insights will report that information back to you. That way you know what the actual exception is. It can even get down to the actual person that was using it. Have you guys ever used Raygun? So it's a similar concept as Raygun. Xamarin offers Xamarin University, which it's like tutorials. And Xamarin is actually a pretty expensive option as well. It's $2,000 a year. That's probably one of the biggest drawbacks, at least for me, about Xamarin. It's a pretty costly venture. It's an investment, in other words. Let me see anything else. Real quick as well, the Visual Studio team at Microsoft is actually trying to develop their own Android emulator. And it's kind of like, if you guys are familiar with Browser Link in Visual Studio. So they're trying to follow the same concept as Browser Link, where you have your app running in an emulator, but you can make UI changes in either Xamarin or in Visual Studio, I'm sorry, and those changes are reflected instantly or almost instantly. I don't know exactly how that's going to work.
So Adobe's doing something similar in that you can browse web pages across all your devices, just with a
Right.
same kind of thing.
I'm sure it's a performance hit because that's your app that's running in the emulator has a connection to your actual development environment, and it's constantly in communication. So I don't know how they're getting past that hurdle. So anybody else have any?
So the Xamarin Studio, it can be used to build native Mac OS application.
Yes.
And the iOS application on the Android.
Yep. You can build Mac apps as well. You have to actually purchase that option as well, though. Anybody have anything about the internals, stuff that's going on with Xamarin Android or just Xamarin in general?
Will Xamarin be useful for build ones distributed platforms? Let's say you said we can use as a native libraries or some libraries.
Right.
Use the different UI from Xcode from iOS and Android.
No. If you're just using, like, let's say, for example, if I just wanted to write a Xamarin Android application, I don't think that I could take the XML markup, if I'm understanding your question correctly, and just copy that and paste it into Xamarin Android. Xamarin has their own flavor. It's called AXML, and I don't know if it actually follows the same rules that Android XML does. But you can try it out. Anybody else?
On that question, so you can actually use Android libraries or iOS libraries inside your Xamarin app.
Yes.
You have to create a binding project, but it's fairly simple. However, you can't do it the reverse. You can't have a Xamarin library used in an iOS or an Android application.
So there's two ways to be able to use these libraries. Like he was saying, you can use the bindings project. You can actually create that. Basically, what that does, it creates a mapping from C# down to the actual, like, let's say, a jar file, and then you can consume that app or that jar file or that binding in your Xamarin application. It's for Java or Objective-C. Did somebody ask that from the videos? Or somebody in the chat room? That's it, guys. If you don't have any more questions. Oh, real quick, I do have a couple of giveaways.